7 reasons why I don't buy the idea that the Earth is billions of years old. First off, why would it matter how old the Earth is? Well, it's all about differing worldviews. If you see evolution as our origin story, then you need a few billion years for all that evolving to take place. But if you believe in the creation and historical narratives that the Bible lays out, then the Earth should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 years old. There's a big difference there. So why don't we just look at the evidence and let that decide? Well, as it turns out, there is no time-stamped video footage of the Earth coming into existence. And the evidence we do have requires some interpretation, which means that the conclusions you will come to will be influenced by your worldview. Just like you see in politics, a Democrat and Republican can look at the same thing and come away with 2 completely different conclusions. I think that the proof for a young Earth is solid because it undergoes more criticism. Most people just accept the idea of an old Earth because it's been pushed on them ever since they were old enough to have a book on dinosaurs. That being said, here are 7 reasons why I don't buy the idea of an old Earth. There is a specific instance of scientists finding a T-Rex fossil dated to be 70 million years old with soft tissue still inside. Now, this is not the same situation as the guy who went on the Joe Rogan podcast, who has apparently dug up so many woolly mammoth carcasses with meat still on the bone that he started making chili with the meat. That was in Alaska. They were probably frozen. The T-Rex was found in Montana in a sandstone formation, so not frozen. The bone was broken at the dig site, and that's how they found the tissue. It included protein, intact cells, blood vessels, and it was still flexible and somewhat elastic. And some of the bone still had fiber to it, so not really completely fossilized. Now, paleontologists don't make a habit of letting their fossils get broken, to say the least. So it is extremely rare to see the inside of a fossil. But there have been other examples since then of poorly preserved fossils being dissected and finding soft tissue inside that is supposedly 75 million years old. Yeah, that's not supposed to happen. You can try to explain that away, but remember, we're not trying to explain how soft tissue survives for 5,000 years. I mean, that would be very unlikely, but possible, I guess. We're trying to explain how it could have survived for 70 million years. On a lighter note, the scientists were going to try to find DNA from the T-Rex tissue so that they could better study the biology of dinosaurs. Did we learn nothing from Jurassic Park? Speaking of Jurassic Park, that brings us to number 2. Do you remember the cane that the old guy had? It had a giant mosquito fossilized in amber for a handle. The story was that they had extracted dino blood and DNA from the mosquito and used that to create dinosaurs. Well, they have actually done something similar to that in real life. One research team has actually found 1,200 different kinds of microorganisms in these types of fossils. Some of those microorganisms were 45 million year old yeast that they were actually able to revive. One of those scientists put a patent on 4 of those yeasts and put them to use brewing beer that they sold commercially. 45 million years old? Really? How do you believe that something that small not only was able to survive for 45 million years, but then came back to life? I guess if you believe that life came out of nothing to begin with, it's not really that hard. Point number 3. People point to geology when you talk about the age of the Earth. We have many layers of rock with fossils in them, so they have definitely developed since the world came into existence. The idea is that it takes thousands and even millions of years for each layer to form. And with so many different layers, the Earth must be billions of years old. But that is only the case if you come into the conversation already believing in an old Earth. Because if you believe in the Bible and the young Earth, it makes more sense that these layers of rock formed during the aftermath of Noah's flood. How did this happen? If you take a jar and fill it with dirt, sand, and gravel, mix it all up, set it down and let it settle, it will make layers with all the different kinds of earth. Is there any evidence that this actually happened? There are these bent rock formations. These were likely caused by tectonic plate shifting. But as you can see, the rock was bent, not broken, which would mean that all of these layers of rock were still pliable when they were moved. which would mean that they were all formed at the same time, which would lead you to believe in a young Earth. Number 4. When you radiocarbon date diamonds that geologists believe to have been formed near the origins of the Earth, they should be billions of years old, but they date to 55,000 years. Now, you're really not supposed to carbon date things this old because they shouldn't contain any radiocarbon. And when you get a date like this on anything else, it's chalked up to contamination. But the thing about a diamond is that they can't be contaminated, which means that these diamonds that geologists put at the origins of the Earth are only thousands of years old, not billions. But hey, 55,000 years is still older than a young Earth should be, right? That brings me to number 5. All radiometric dating assumes an old Earth as a starting point. Radiometric dating starts with taking a measurement of certain radioactive elements in a sample. These unstable and radioactive elements decay into non-radioactive and more stable elements. This happens at a known and very consistent rate. So if you know how much of a radioactive element there is now, and you know how much of it there was to begin with, you can make a calculation to figure out how old that sample is. The problem is, they assume that it started out with the same amount that it would have if it was formed today, which is a pretty reasonable assumption, if you believe in an old Earth. But if you believe in the Bible, no decay should have started until after the fall of man, some 6,000 years ago, which would mean that a sample from 6,000 years ago would be radiometrically dated to be billions of years old, because it would have such a low amount of these decaying elements. Number 6. Something else you always hear about is the hundreds of millions of light years that stars are away from the Earth. It takes light a year to travel a light year, hence the name, which means it would have taken hundreds of millions of years for us to see the stars. Well, this is actually really simple. Why did God create the stars? In Genesis chapter 1 it says, He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. So if God made stars to give light on earth, don't you think He would have created them in such a way that you could see their light on earth? The point being that if you actually believe that God created the earth, how far away the stars are doesn't matter. And number 7, people count tree rings to see how old a tree is. It's definitely not a perfect science, but I do enjoy how well it lines up with a young Earth worldview, because the oldest living tree has 5,000 rings. Now I realize that the reasons I've given you aren't bulletproof, but it is better than what the other side's got going for it. I really feel like these things neutralize the arguments for an old Earth. At the end of the day, you can believe whatever you want, but don't think it makes you smarter to believe in an old Earth. It doesn't. And don't feel bad for believing in a young Earth, because it's a perfectly reasonable thing to believe. And don't feel like science demands an old Earth, because it doesn't.